My future daughter-in-law, Bianca Vance, pulled my wife Martha's wig off in the middle of the crowded ballroom at my son's wedding, exposing her bruised, bare scalp to 300 staring guests just for a cheap laugh. Her bridesmaids giggled, and some of the wealthy guests actually snickered. But I did not scream, I did not throw a punch, and I did not make a scene. I simply walked onto the stage, wrapped my warm wool suit jacket around Martha's shaking shoulders, and handed Bianca the heavy cream-colored envelope she had been desperately begging for all night. When she tore it open, expecting a multi-million-dollar deed or a fat cash check, her smug, arrogant grin froze and turned into pure terror. If you are just starting to listen to this, take a deep breath, because what I am about to share is a nightmare that no father should ever have to witness inside his own home. My name is Clifton Barlow. I am 68 years old, and for 40 years, I built a commercial waterfront cargo leasing and warehousing business right here in the historic district of Boston. I started with nothing but a single wooden pier and a leased crane, and by the time I retired, my company owned several major wharves along the harbor. But a year ago, I stepped away from the business, delegating the daily operations to my senior partners. I had only one focus left in this world, caring for my wife, Martha. Martha is 66, and she has been fighting a brutal, exhausting battle against late-stage follicular lymphoma. The chemotherapy has been completely merciless. It took her hair, her physical energy, and some days it threatened to take her spirit. Our historic multi-story home in Beacon Hill, where we had lived for 3 decades, had suddenly become a daily obstacle course for her. The steep, narrow stairs were a mountain her frail legs could no longer climb. She needed to live on a single flat level, and she needed to be close to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she received her weekly oncology treatments. My only priority was to provide comfort, safety, and dignity to the woman who had loved me when I had absolutely nothing. 6 months before the wedding disaster, I found what seemed like the perfect solution. It was a spacious, ground-floor colonial ranch house in Concord, surrounded by flat stone pathways and featuring a private glass greenhouse where Martha could sit and watch the flowers. It was just a short drive to her oncology clinic, because Martha required constant attention and I refused to leave her bedside for more than an hour. My 31-year-old son, Julian, offered to handle the entire real estate purchase for us. Julian was my only son, my pride and joy, a young man I had supported through a top-tier business school. I trusted him with my life. So, when he told me he needed the funds to secure the contract, I went to the bank and got a cashier's check for $150,000. It was the exact amount required for the down payment and closing costs. I handed it to Julian, thinking he was taking a heavy burden off my shoulders. 3 days later, I wanted to confirm that the money had been safely deposited into the real estate escrow account. I wanted to surprise Martha with the keys that weekend, to give her a glimmer of hope during a particularly painful week of chemotherapy. I drove down to our primary commercial bank branch in downtown Boston. The autumn air was crisp as I walked through the heavy glass doors. I approached the counter and greeted Mrs. Higgins, the branch manager who had overseen my corporate accounts for 20 years. I asked her to pull the clearance records for the cashier's check I had issued to Julian. I just wanted the official transaction receipt for my personal tax records. Mrs. Higgins smiled warmly and began typing on her computer keyboard. She looked at the screen and then her smile slowly faded. She adjusted her reading glasses, frowned, and clicked her mouse several times. She looked up and told me that the check had indeed cleared the previous afternoon. I felt a brief wave of relief, thinking the Concord house was officially secured. But then she printed out the scanned copy of the cleared check, turned it over, and slid the paper across the polished counter. I looked down at the sheet. You do not survive 40 years in the competitive shipping and commercial leasing business by ignoring numbers or failing to read the fine print. My mind is trained to spot discrepancies in ledger entries, shipping manifests, and bank statements instantly. The moment my eyes locked onto the endorsement stamp on the back of the check, my blood ran cold. The payee on the back was not the real estate escrow company. It was not a title agency or a Concord property trust. The $150 Zeros had been endorsed and deposited directly into the corporate account of a high-end luxury auto group located in the heart of Boston's Back Bay. I stood in the middle of the quiet bank lobby, staring at the black ink on the page. My mind was spinning, trying to construct some kind of logical explanation. Maybe it was a clerical error at the bank. Maybe Julian had accidentally deposited it into the wrong folder. But bank routing numbers and corporate tax codes do not make mistakes. The money I had carefully set aside, the money that was supposed to buy a safe, flat home for my terminally ill wife, had just been washed into a luxury car dealership. I did not scream, and I did not make a scene in front of the teller. I thanked Mrs. Higgins, took the printed copy of the check, folded it twice, and placed it inside my breast pocket. My hands were perfectly steady, but inside my chest, a dark, freezing storm was starting to build. I walked out to my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and sat there for a long time, staring out at the Boston traffic. I remembered a phone call from just a week ago. Julian had called me, sounding incredibly stressed, asking if I could wire him an extra $5,000 to cover a specialized motorized medical bed for Martha. He had claimed that the family investment trust was temporarily locked up in quarterly audits and that he was struggling to find the cash. He had painted a picture of tight finances, yet here was a check for $150,000 that had cleared directly into a luxury car dealer. I started the engine. I did not drive back to our home in Beacon Hill to sit with Martha. I drove straight toward the affluent suburb of Brookline, where Julian lived with his fiancée, Bianca. Bianca was 28, a high-end real estate agent who always seemed to treat our family not as people but as a business opportunity. She was obsessed with status, branding, and what she called the optics of success. I had always tried to overlook her superficial nature because Julian insisted he loved her, and I wanted my son to be happy. But as I drove, the pieces of a very dark picture began to fall into place. I was no longer a father checking on his son. I was an auditor walking into a crime scene. I pulled onto their quiet, tree-lined street in Brookline. The neighborhood was filled with manicured lawns and historic brick estates. As I approached their property, I slowed my car down, pulling over to the curb just a few houses away. I looked through my windshield toward their wide paved driveway. What I saw in that exact moment completely shattered whatever remaining illusion I had about my son and his future wife. There, gleaming under the morning sun, sat a brand new, fully loaded Mercedes-AMG G63 in obsidian black. The dealer temporary plates were still attached to the rear bumper, and standing right in front of it was Bianca. She was wearing designer sunglasses and an expensive activewear outfit, holding her phone high in the air. She was practically dancing around the boxy vehicle, smiling widely, posing and taking selfies from every possible angle for her social media. I sat in my car watching this woman celebrate. She was posing with a luxury vehicle, bought with the exact funds meant to keep my dying wife from suffering on a staircase. The money meant for Martha's comfort was currently reflecting the sun off a German luxury SUV. Bianca was laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching her. She had no idea that the quiet, retired old man she always dismissed as a dinosaur was sitting just 100 feet away, holding the bank statement that exposed her greed. I stood by my car door for a moment, just observing the scene. I watched Bianca lean against the polished hood of the G-Wagon, adjusting her hair for another photo. The sheer audacity of it was suffocating. I had spent my entire life building security for my family. I had worked 18-hour days, missed holidays, and sacrificed my own youth so that my son would never know the anxiety of an empty bank account. I had handed over that check with the pure, unconditional love of a father trying to protect his sick wife. And they had taken that love, that vulnerability, and twisted it into a status symbol to park in their driveway. Every click of her phone camera felt like a direct insult to Martha's suffering. While my wife was sitting in a recliner too weak to walk up to her own bedroom, Bianca was curating an image of wealth and success on the internet. The contrast was so stark, so utterly repulsive that a cold, hardened resolve settled over my heart. I was no longer just a grieving husband. I was a man who had been robbed. I closed my car door with a solid, heavy thud and began to walk up the driveway toward her. I did not know exactly what lie they were going to tell me, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to let them dig their own grave. I walked up the smooth gray concrete of their driveway. The morning air was crisp, but my chest burned with a heat I had not felt in decades. My footsteps were slow and deliberate. Bianca was too absorbed in finding the perfect angle for her photos to notice me. She leaned against the polished hood of the G-Wagon, tilting her head and flashing a brilliant empty smile at her phone screen. It was Julian who saw me first. He stepped out of the three-car garage, wiping his hands on a pristine white towel. He was wearing a casual weekend outfit that probably cost more than my first crane. He had a relaxed, arrogant smile on his face, but that smile vanished the absolute second his eyes locked onto mine. His posture stiffened. The towel in his hand suddenly stopped moving. I did not rush. I did not yell. In 40 years of running a waterfront empire, dealing with corrupt union reps and striking dock workers, I learned one universal truth. A quiet, controlled presence is far more terrifying than a man who screams. I stopped a few feet away from him. Bianca finally looked up, lowering her phone with a look of mild annoyance that quickly shifted to forced surprise. I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out the folded copy of the cleared bank check. I held it out to my son. I did not say a word, I just waited. Julian hesitated for a second before taking the paper. His eyes scanned the black and white ink, the routing numbers, the clear endorsement stamp from the luxury auto group. I watched the blood drain completely from his face. His skin turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Dad," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "I can explain this. This is not what it looks like." I kept my hands comfortably in my pockets. "It looks exactly like what it is, Julian. It looks like the $150,000 ground floor home for your dying mother was just handed over to a luxury car dealership. So, please explain it to me. Make it make sense." Julian wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. His mind was racing, trying to construct a bridge over a burning chasm. He took a deep breath, and the panic in his eyes was suddenly replaced by a look of earnest, practiced professionalism. It was a mask I had seen him wear during corporate board meetings. "The Concord Ranch house fell through, Dad," he said quickly, handing the paper back to me. During the final title search, the escrow company found a massive hidden lien on the property from a previous contractor's dispute. It was a legal nightmare. If I had left your cash in that escrow account, it could have been frozen in court litigation for years. I had to pull the funds out immediately to protect your money. I stared at him. It was a brilliant lie. It used real estate terminology, it played on my desire to protect my assets, and it framed him as the savior of the situation. But a lien does not force a buyer to endorse a cashier's check to a Mercedes dealership. I waited for him to finish the bridge. "I had the cash in hand," Julian continued, his voice gaining confidence. "And right at that moment, Bianca got the call. She landed the executive director position at the prime Boston Estates brokerage downtown. Dad, they deal in $15 million estates. She is to be securing VIP clients, athletes, and international developers. In that world, optics are everything. If she pulls up to a waterfront mansion in a used sedan, they won't even let her pass the security gate. She needed a closer's car." Bianca, sensing her cue perfectly, stepped away from the G-Wagon and walked toward us. The Instagram model vanished instantly, replaced by the devoted, hard-working daughter-in-law. Her eyes widened with manufactured concern. She quickly wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek. "Clifton," she said, using my first name with a soft and trembling voice, "I am so sorry we didn't call you first. Everything happened so fast. I didn't want to use your money, but Julian insisted it was an investment in our family's future." "An investment?" I repeated flatly. "Yes, Dad," Julian jumped in. "Her first commission check next month will be over $200,000. I am going to return your entire $150,000 plus 10% interest. And then we will find a much better home for Mom. One with a private greenhouse, I promise you. We just needed to leverage the cash for 30 days to launch her new career." Bianca reached out and gently touched my arm. Her acrylic nails tapped against my wool jacket. She looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I am grinding myself to the bone for this family, Clifton. I swear to you. I want to land these massive accounts for one reason only. I want to pay for Martha's experimental treatments. I want to send her to that specialized clinic in Switzerland you were reading about. I love her like my own mother. I am doing this for her. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my shoulders in a tight hug. As she pressed against me, the heavy scent of her expensive perfume filled my nose, mixing with the smell of fresh tire wax from the G-Wagon behind her. Then, as if remembering a prop in a stage play, she pulled away and gestured to a designer canvas tote bag resting on the hood of the SUV. Oh, I almost forgot. I woke up at 5 this morning to make this. She reached into the bag and pulled out a sleek, designer stainless steel wellness flask. It's a fresh organic wellness green smoothie packed with natural antioxidants and active botanical enzymes to boost her cellular recovery. I was just about to drive to the hospital to drop it off for Martha. Please take it to her. Tell her I am praying for her every single hour. I took the heavy wellness flask from her hands. The metal was cool. I looked at the flask, then at the shiny black G-Wagon, and finally at my son. Julian was standing tall now, looking at me with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully conned an old fool. In my mind, 1,000 alarms were ringing. I knew that pulling funds from an escrow account requires signing a legal release form, which I had not done. I knew that luxury cars lose 20% of their value the second they are driven off the lot, making them the worst possible short-term liquid investment. I knew they were lying through their teeth. But if I exploded right there, if I demanded my money back and threatened legal action, they would just secure a bank loan against the G-Wagon, pay me back, and I would never truly know the depth of their deception. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. I needed them to feel completely safe. I softened the muscles in my face. I let my shoulders drop, adopting the posture of a tired, overwhelmed husband who was just relieved that his son was handling things. I understand, Julian, I said, forcing a weary sigh. I am just so stressed about your mother. Her latest lab results were terrible. I panicked when I saw the bank statement. I should have trusted you. You're a smart businessman. Just please find her a safe place soon. We don't have much time left. Julian smiled a genuine predatory smile of victory. Don't worry about a thing, Dad. I have everything under control. Tell Mom we love her. I nodded, offering Bianca a small, grateful smile for the smoothie. I turned around and began the walk back to my car. I kept my pace slow and slightly unsteady, playing the part of the relieved, trusting father to perfection. I opened my car door, placed the wellness flask carefully on the passenger seat, and climbed behind the wheel. I started the engine and shifted into gear. As I began to pull away from the curb, I glanced into my side mirror. Bianca had already turned her back, walking toward the driver's side of the G-Wagon with her phone raised, immediately resuming her photo shoot. But Julian was still standing in the driveway. He was not looking at Bianca. He was looking nervously over his shoulder, scanning the street to make sure I was driving away. Satisfied that I was leaving, he reached into the front pocket of his designer jeans. He did not pull out his expensive silver smartphone. He pulled out a thick, cheap, black plastic burner phone, the kind you buy with cash at a convenience store, the kind that cannot be traced. Even from a distance, I could see the sudden, frantic energy in his movements. His thumbs were flying across the small keypad. He was not just sending a text, he was rapidly pushing buttons, navigating menus, and aggressively deleting things. The calm, confident businessman from 2 minutes ago was gone. He looked terrified. A legitimate executive running a family trust does not carry an untraceable burner phone. And he certainly does not stand in his driveway, frantically wiping its memory after his father catches him stealing. I drove down the street, the cold wellness flask of green juice resting beside me. My son had not just stolen my money to buy a car. He was hiding something much deeper, something dangerous enough to require a shadow phone. And as I looked at the flask Bianca had made for my dying wife, a dark, chilling realization washed over me. The rabbit hole was much deeper than a luxury SUV, and I was going to dig until I found the very bottom. The drive to Massachusetts General Hospital was usually a time for me to mentally prepare for the clinical environment, the sterile smells, and the quiet hum of medical machinery. Today, however, my mind was entirely consumed by the heavy stainless steel flask sitting on the passenger seat. I carried it through the sliding glass doors of the hospital, taking the elevator up to the oncology wing where my wife was fighting the hardest battle of her life. When I walked into Martha's private room, the sight of her nearly brought me to my knees. Just 3 weeks ago, her oncologist had been cautiously optimistic. Her white blood cell counts were stabilizing, and she had even managed to walk down the hospital corridor unassisted. But over the last 14 days, her condition had inexplicably plummeted. She looked devastatingly frail. Her skin was pale and translucent, stretching tightly over her cheekbones. She was sleeping, her chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. I set the flask down on the small rolling table beside her bed and pulled up a chair. I took her thin, delicate hand in mine, feeling the prominent veins under her fragile skin. She stirred slightly, opening her tired eyes to look at me. She managed a weak, heartbreaking smile. I kissed her forehead gently, asking how she was feeling today. She whispered that the nausea was overwhelming, a deep, persistent sickness that seemed to radiate from her very bones. She mentioned that she had not been able to keep any solid food down since yesterday afternoon. I looked at the flask Bianca had packed. The devoted, caring daughter-in-law act played in my head like a poorly scripted movie. Bianca had insisted on preparing these special green wellness smoothies every single morning for the past 2 weeks. She claimed they were a premium, raw food detox diet from California, packed with organic nutrients to help Martha regain her strength during chemotherapy. I unscrewed the lid of the flask. A thick, cold, grassy steam rose from the dark green liquid inside. It did not smell like a fresh blend of kale and green apples. It had a sharp, bitter, almost medicinal odor that immediately made my stomach turn. I poured a small amount into a plastic hospital cup. The liquid was murky, hiding crushed herbal particles and tiny dark spots that floated to the surface. Martha looked at the cup, her face contorting in mild discomfort. She told me softly that the green juice always made her feel incredibly sick right after drinking it. But she drank it anyway, because Bianca went through so much trouble to make it every morning, and she did not want to seem ungrateful to our son's future wife. She wanted so badly for us to be a united family. My chest tightened. A dark, terrifying suspicion began to take root in my mind. The timeline was simply too perfect. Martha's rapid, unexplained decline perfectly coincided with the exact moment Bianca started delivering these daily homemade wellness smoothies. I thought about the cleared check for $150,000. I thought about the luxury G-Wagons sitting in their driveway. I thought about the burner phone Julian was frantically wiping clean in the driveway. These were not the actions of innocent, caring people who were simply trying to help a sick relative. They were the actions of desperate individuals executing a calculated plan. I placed the lid back on the flask and tightened it firmly. I told Martha that she did not have to drink the green juice today. I told her I would go down to the cafeteria and get her some simple hot chamomile tea and dry toast instead. I watched her close her eyes in relief, her exhausted body sinking back into the hospital pillows. I grabbed the flask and stepped out into the bustling hospital hallway. I did not go to the cafeteria. I walked straight to the staff elevators and rode them down to the pathology and research wing. I needed to see Dr. Alan Bennett. Alan was not just the lead oncologist managing Martha's cancer case. He was an old college friend I had known for over 30 years. I found him in his private office, reviewing patient charts under the hum of fluorescent lights. He looked up, surprised to see me outside of Martha's scheduled consultation time. I placed the stainless steel flask directly on his desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I told him I needed a massive favor, no questions asked, and completely off the official medical records. I asked him to run a rapid toxicology screen and a chemical analysis on the contents of the green juice. Alan frowned, looking from the flask to my face. He asked if I had a reason to suspect food poisoning or accidental contamination at the local juice bar. I told him I suspected something much worse than simple contamination, but I needed absolute scientific proof before I tore my family apart. Because Alan knew my character, because he knew I was not a man prone to paranoia, irrational panic, or dramatic accusations, he agreed. He picked up the flask, walked it down the secure corridor, and entered the pathology laboratory. I paced the sterile hallway for what felt like an eternity. The floor tiles seemed to stretch on forever. Every minute dragged on, filled with agonizing thoughts of my wife suffering in her bed while we paid for a luxury SUV for the woman who claimed to love her. I thought about Julian, the boy I had raised to be an honest man, standing in his driveway deleting data from a burner phone. The anger inside me was evolving into something much more dangerous than simple rage. It was turning into a cold, absolute, and deadly focus. About 45 minutes later, the double doors of the pathology lab swung open. Alan walked out into the hallway. His face was completely drained of color, his usual professional composure entirely gone. He did not invite me back into his office. He pulled me into a quiet, secluded alcove near the emergency exit, away from the passing nurses and residents. He handed me a freshly printed lab report, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked me dead in the eye, his voice low and serious. He asked me exactly who had been feeding this mixture to Martha. I told him it was Bianca, my son's fiancée, who claimed she was making organic wellness smoothies to help cure her. Alan lowered his voice to a grave, urgent whisper. He explained that the green juice was not a healthy detox smoothie. It was highly concentrated with a massive, therapeutic dose of a specific botanical extract called St. John's wort, mixed with active golden seal compounds. He explained the pharmacokinetics to me in rapid, terrifying detail. St. John's wort is a powerful enzyme inducer in the human liver. When ingested in such massive concentrated quantities daily, it forces the liver to rapidly metabolize and flush out complex foreign medications. It was completely neutralizing Martha's chemotherapy drugs, specifically her targeted cancer treatment. The life-saving medication was being destroyed in her bloodstream before it could even reach the lymphoma cells. It was actively accelerating the cancer's growth while making her violently ill from the chemical interactions. The hallway seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The buzzing lights above me faded into a dull, distant hum. This was not a tragic medical mistake. This was not a case of naive alternative medicine. This was intentional, calculated sabotage. Bianca knew exactly what she was doing. She was deliberately poisoning my wife to speed up her death. She wanted Martha gone before the wedding, removing the only emotional and financial anchor holding my estate together. She wanted the money, the trusts, and the commercial assets, and she was willing to commit murder to get them. I was no longer dealing with a greedy, materialistic child. I was dealing with a cold-blooded monster hiding behind a perfect Instagram smile. And now, I was going to destroy her. I stood in the quiet corner of the hallway, holding the printed laboratory report. The numbers and chemical symbols on the paper blurred for a second before snapping into sharp, terrifying focus. I looked up at Alan. He had his arms crossed, his face still pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of professional disbelief and personal outrage. He had been managing Martha's cancer treatment for months, adjusting her doses and monitoring her blood counts with meticulous care, only to find out that someone was actively tearing down his work from the inside. "Clifton," Alan said, his voice flat and strained. "This is not a case of a well-meaning relative buying a cheap supplement from a health food store. The concentration levels in this green juice are astronomical. Whoever prepared this had to buy industrial-grade botanical extracts. They were using a combination of highly concentrated St. John's wort and liquid golden seal root." He pointed to a specific section of the report, tapping his finger against the printed numbers. "We have Martha on a targeted tyrosine kinase inhibitor called imatinib to control her lymphoma. It's a highly effective drug, but its efficacy depends entirely on how long it remains in her bloodstream. St. John's wort is a potent inducer of the cytochrome P450 enzyme system in the liver, specifically the CP3A4 pathway. This is the exact metabolic highway that breaks down imatinib." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice even further. "By flooding her system with these concentrated extracts every single day for 14 days, they have forced her liver to process the chemotherapy drug at 5 times its normal speed. The medication is being neutralized and flushed out of her body before it can even bind to the cancer cells. For the past 2 weeks, Martha has essentially had zero active cancer treatment in her system. The lymphoma is growing unchecked, and the chemical overload is what is causing her extreme nausea and physical collapse." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air of the hospital corridor fill my lungs. The heat of my initial anger was gone, replaced by a cold mathematical calculation. My brain, which had spent 40 years tracking cargo ships, coordinating dock workers, and auditing corporate accounts, was now processing this new data with clinical efficiency. "It's attempted murder, Alan," I said quietly. My voice was perfectly steady, devoid of the panic that usually accompanies such a realization. "That is what we are looking at." Alan nodded grimly. "Yes. Under Massachusetts law, this is a major felony. It's intentional poisoning of a vulnerable person. We need to call MGH security right now, and we need to contact the Boston Police Department. I have to report this, Clifton. I cannot ignore a toxicology report like this. It is my legal duty as her physician." I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Alan, look at me. If you call the police right now, what happens? They will dispatch 2 patrol officers to Julian and Bianca's house in Brookline. Bianca is a licensed luxury real estate agent. She is polished, she is highly connected, and she has access to a massive amount of cash that I now know she stole from me. The moment the police show up, she will play the shocked, grieving daughter-in-law." I squeezed his shoulder, making sure he was listening to every word. "She will claim she was just trying a trendy organic wellness therapy she read about online. She will hire the most expensive defense attorneys in Boston. They will claim the St. John's wort concentration was an accidental dosing error from a holistic manufacturer. They will drag Martha through depositions, tie the case up in court for years, and tip off Julian to hide the burner phone and delete the rest of the evidence. They will escape the net, Alan, and I will not allow them to escape." Alan stared at me, his brow furrowed. "But Clifton, we cannot just let her keep drinking this. Martha's body cannot take another week of this sabotage. Her immune system is already compromised. If we do nothing, she will not survive the month." "I am not asking you to do nothing," I replied. "I am asking you to change the treatment protocol immediately, but in a way that does not alert them. We need to protect Martha, but we must keep Bianca and Julian believing their plan is working perfectly. If they think Martha is dying on schedule, they will stay relaxed. They will keep using the burner phone. They will keep making mistakes, and they will walk right into the trap I am going to set for them." Alan walked back to his office door, looking out at the nurse's station before turning back to me. He rubbed his face with both hands, clearly wrestling with the ethical and legal weight of my request. But he had also known me for 30 years. He knew that when I set a course, I did not veer from it, and he knew that my primary goal was the absolute safety of my wife. "All right," Alan said slowly. "Here is what we do. We will admit Martha to the high-security VIP wing on the 8th floor. It has restricted access, and visitors must be cleared by you personally. We will officially state that her white blood cell counts have dropped to critical levels due to the aggressive nature of her lymphoma, justifying the isolation." He picked up a notepad and began writing rapidly. "We will immediately discontinue all oral medications. We will switch her to an intravenous chemotherapy regimen. The IV drugs bypass the liver's metabolic pathway entirely, meaning the St. John's wort will have zero effect on the chemotherapy's efficacy. The treatment will be administered directly through her port under the constant supervision of a registered nurse. No outside food, beverages, or wellness smoothies will be permitted in her room. If Bianca brings another flask, the nurses will take it, pretend to feed it to Martha, and dump it down the drain." "And the staff?" I asked. "I will handle the nursing staff personally," Alan said. "I will tell them that Martha is participating in a highly sensitive clinical trial with strict dietary controls. They will not question the protocol. But Clifton, you need to understand that this only buys us a limited amount of time. The wedding is in less than 3 weeks. If Martha starts showing signs of rapid recovery, Bianca will notice. She will realize something is wrong with her timeline. 3 weeks is all I need," I said. "By the time they realize Martha is recovering, it will already be over for them. The legal and financial trap will have snapped shut." I reached out and took the pathology report from Alan's hand, folding it carefully and placing it next to the copy of the cleared check in my breast pocket. I had the medical proof of their betrayal. I had the bank records of their theft. The picture was becoming clearer, but I still did not know the full extent of what they were trying to steal. I thanked Alan, shook his hand, and walked back up to the fourth floor to prepare Martha for her transfer to the secure wing. As I rode the elevator up, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. The tired, grieving, retired husband was gone. I was back in the war room, and I was going to ensure that the people who tried to destroy my wife paid for every single drop of her suffering. I walked back into Martha's room on the fourth floor, carrying a cup of plain, lukewarm chamomile tea. She was still resting, her breathing shallow but steady. I set the tea gently on her bedside table. Then I picked up the heavy stainless steel flask containing Bianca's green smoothie. I carried it into her private bathroom and poured the dark, toxic liquid directly down the drain. I watched the murky green juice swirl and vanish, taking with it the physical evidence of my daughter-in-law's monstrous intentions. I rinsed the flask thoroughly with scalding hot water, leaving absolutely no trace of the chemical compounds inside. I could have screamed. I could have driven straight to Bianca's real estate office in Brookline and dragged her out by her hair. But rage is a luxury a man in my position simply cannot afford. Rage makes you sloppy, rage makes you predictable, and I needed to be entirely unpredictable. Leaving the clean, empty flask on the bathroom counter, I sat down beside Martha. She opened her eyes, looking at me with a weary, questioning gaze. I took her hand. I did not tell her that her son and future daughter-in-law were poisoning her. Her heart was too weak, and her spirit was already too broken. The shock of knowing Julian was complicit in a plot to accelerate her death might have killed her right then and there. "Martha, sweetheart," I said, offering a soft, reassuring smile. "Dr. Bennett wants to move you to a different wing upstairs. Your white blood cell counts are down, and he wants to put you in a highly sterile, restricted environment to prevent any infections. It's just a standard precaution." She nodded weakly, trusting me implicitly as she had for 4 decades. "Whatever you and Alan think is best, Clifton. I'm just so tired." Within an hour, Alan's team had transferred Martha to a spacious private room on the 8th floor. The VIP oncology wing was quiet, secure, and required a security code to enter the heavy double doors. Once she was settled and sleeping under the administration of her new intravenous chemotherapy, I walked out to the nurses' station to establish our defense. I did not rely solely on the hospital's standard security. I called a private, high-end medical staffing agency that I had used for corporate security audits in the past. I hired 3 private, thoroughly vetted registered nurses to stand guard over my wife on rotating 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. I paid them a premium cash rate out of my personal account. My instructions to the private nurses and the MGH floor staff were simple, written down, and legally binding. First, under no circumstances was any outside food, beverage, or herbal supplement to be brought into Martha's room. Second, Bianca Vance was strictly prohibited from entering the room unless I was physically standing there beside her. If Bianca showed up alone, the nurse on duty was to block her entrance immediately, cite the sterile protocol, and call my personal cell phone. The defense was set. The first test of our line came less than 24 hours later. It was 3 the following afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, reviewing some old trust documents when my phone rang. It was Nurse Clara, the daytime private nurse I had stationed in Martha's room. "Mr. Barlow," Clara said, her voice low and professional. "Miss Vance has just arrived. She is demanding to see Mrs. Barlow. She brought another stainless steel flask and is insisting on administering her wellness green juice. I have stopped her at the entrance, citing the sterile trial protocol, but she is becoming quite insistent. She is asking why her name is not on the cleared visitor list." "Keep her there, Clara," I said. "I am on my way up. Do not let her enter the room, and do not let her leave with that flask." I took the elevator up to the 8th floor. When the double doors opened, I saw Bianca standing near the security desk. She was wearing a tailored designer suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, holding the familiar silver flask in one hand and her smartphone in the other. She was smiling, but her eyes were tight with an intense, controlled frustration. She was speaking to the floor receptionist in a sharp, demanding tone that she quickly softened the second she saw me walk down the hall. "Clifton," she cried, walking toward me and putting on her familiar face of deep maternal concern. "Thank goodness you're here. The nurses are refusing to let me in. They are claiming Martha is in some kind of lockdown isolation, and they won't even let me give her the fresh organic smoothie I made. I woke up at 5 a.m. again just to press these ingredients. She needs her nutrients, Clifton. I let my shoulders sag, putting on the mask of the exhausted, helpless retired husband. I wiped my brow, letting my hands shake slightly. "Oh, Bianca, thank you for coming," I sighed, keeping my voice low and weary. "It's been a nightmare. Alan tells me her immune system is completely collapsed. Her white blood cell counts are near zero. The doctors are terrified of any bacterial contamination. They have put her on a strict clinical trial protocol. No outside food, no outside drinks. Everything has to be completely sterile, administered directly through her IV." Bianca's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her polished mask. She looked down at the silver flask in her hand. "But this is completely organic, Clifton. It's raw, unpasteurized, and packed with cellular enzymes. It's exactly what her body needs to fight the chemo side effects." I know, I said, offering a helpless shrug. I told Alan the same thing. But he was furious. He said any raw, unpasteurized liquid could carry microbacteria that would kill her in her current state. He threatened to kick us out of the trial if we violated the rules. "I can't risk it, Bianca. We have to do exactly what the specialists say." I turned to Nurse Clara, who was standing nearby watching the exchange. "Clara, could you please take this flask from Miss Vance? Keep it in the staff kitchen. Once Martha is cleared to have outside liquids again, we will use it. But for now, we must follow the doctor's orders." Nurse Clara stepped forward, taking the flask from Bianca's hands with a polite nod. I saw Bianca's fingers tighten on the metal before she slowly let go. Her smile was forced, her posture stiff. "Of course," Bianca said, her voice dropping to a sweet trembling pitch. "We must do whatever the doctors say. I just want her to get better, Clifton. Julian and I are praying for her every single hour. Can I at least go in and hold her hand for 5 minutes?" "Not today, dear," I said, gently touching her shoulder. "She is heavily sedated under the new IV protocol. She is sleeping and won't wake up for hours. Go home, rest. You have the wedding planning to focus on. I will stay here with her." Bianca stood there, her eyes scanning the quiet, secure hallway, looking at the private nurse standing by the door. She knew she had been shut out. Her direct access to Martha was gone, and her primary weapon, the toxic smoothie, had been neutralized. She offered me one last tight, manufactured hug, whispered that she loved us, and walked back toward the elevators. I stood by the security desk, watching the floor numbers count down on the elevator panel. The first line of defense had held. But I knew Bianca would not stop here. She was a predator, and when a predator finds its path blocked, it looks for another way to strike. With Martha protected under lock and key at the hospital, I got back into my car. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was exactly too late in the afternoon. I knew Julian and Bianca's schedule perfectly because Bianca had complained endlessly on her social media about it. Today was their final wedding tasting. They were currently across town at an exclusive catering company in the Seaport District, spending 3 hours sampling truffle-infused appetizers and imported champagne. They would be thoroughly distracted and completely unreachable. I drove directly to their upscale neighborhood in Brookline. The streets were quiet, bathed in the soft afternoon sunlight. I parked my car 2 blocks away to avoid drawing any attention from their nosy neighbors. I walked down the sidewalk with a calm, measured pace. When I reached their front door, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the emergency spare key Julian had given me months ago. He had handed it to me with a grand speech about how his home was always my home. It was a hollow, performative gesture, but today, it was my greatest tactical advantage. The lock turned with a smooth, quiet click. I stepped inside and gently closed the solid oak door behind me. The house was immaculate, silent, and smelling faintly of expensive vanilla diffusers. I did not linger in the marble foyer or the custom kitchen I had paid for. I moved purposefully down the hallway and pushed open the double doors leading into my son's private home office. The room was a monument to unearned arrogance. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the space, surrounded by plush leather chairs and shelves filled with unread business books. A designer rug covered the floor, and framed certificates from his prestigious business school hung on the walls. I stepped behind the desk and began my search. I was looking for the cheap black plastic burner phone. I had seen Julian frantically wiping in the driveway. A man hiding a secondary untraceable phone does not carry it into a high-profile catering tasting with his demanding fiancée. He leaves it somewhere safe. Somewhere he assumes no one will ever look. I started with the obvious hiding spots. I opened the desk drawers one by one, sifting through neatly organized files, luxury pens, and blank stationery. I found nothing but corporate documents and tax returns. I checked the pockets of the spare suit jackets hanging in the office closet. Still nothing. I moved to the bookshelves, running my hands behind the leather-bound volumes, checking for false compartments. Nothing. The clock on the wall was ticking, and my window of opportunity was slowly closing. I stood in the center of the room, closed my eyes, and put myself in my son's shoes. Where does a coward hide his most dangerous secrets? Julian was never truly clever. He was just sneaky. He would want the phone close at hand while he worked, but completely out of sight. My eyes scanned the room and locked onto a large, heavy frame hanging on the wall directly opposite his desk. It was a framed, vintage blueprint of the first commercial shipping dock I had built in Boston Harbor 40 years ago. I had given it to Julian as a graduation present when he finished his MBA, a physical reminder of the hard work and legacy that had funded his entire lifestyle. It was the only piece of genuine family history in this sterile, modern house. And the irony of using my legacy to hide his betrayal was exactly the kind of lazy, symbolic choice Julian would make. I walked over to the framed blueprint. The glass reflected the afternoon light. I reached up and carefully lifted the heavy wooden frame off its metal hanger. I turned it over, holding it by the edges. The back of the frame was sealed with thick black backing paper, but near the bottom right corner, the paper had been carefully slit and taped back down with a strip of heavy-duty, black duct tape. My heart gave a hard, rhythmic thud against my ribs. I set the heavy frame down gently on the edge of the mahogany desk. I did not want to tear the backing paper and leave a trace of my intrusion. I used my pocket knife to carefully peel back the strip of duct tape, wincing slightly at the harsh, ripping sound it made in the silent room. My fingers reached into the small cavity between the backing paper and the cardboard sleeve of the frame. They snagged on something thick, rectangular, and plastic. I pulled it out slowly. It was the burner phone. I stood there in the quiet office, holding the small, cheap device in the palm of my hand. It was light, devoid of any branding, and completely clean of fingerprints. I pressed the power button on the side. The small liquid crystal screen lit up with a dull blue glow, immediately demanding a 4-digit numerical passcode. I stared at the lock screen. I knew my son. Despite his business degree and his polished corporate facade, Julian was fundamentally unoriginal. He relied on familiar patterns and safety nets. He did not have the imagination to invent a truly random code. I typed in his birth year. Incorrect. I typed in Bianca's birth year. Incorrect. I tried the digits of his wedding date. Incorrect. A small flashing warning appeared on the screen, indicating that I only had 2 attempts left before the device locked itself permanently, wiping its internal memory. I paused. I closed my eyes and thought back to the boy he used to be, before he met Bianca, before the greed consumed him. I remembered the golden retriever we had bought for him when he was 10 years old. He had loved that dog more than anything in the world. He had named him Rusty. I looked at the numerical keypad. The letters for RUSTY corresponded to the numbers on a standard phone keypad. R is 7, U is 8, S is 7, T is 8. I typed in 7878. The screen blinked, the padlock icon on the screen shattered, and the home menu loaded perfectly. My hands remained completely steady as I navigated the crude menu interface, ready to discover the depth of my son's betrayal. Holding the burner phone in my steady hand, I leaned against the edge of the mahogany desk. The screen was a simple grid of pixelated icons, a far cry from the modern smartphones Julian usually carried. I began my audit of the device with the same systematic focus I used when searching for cargo leaks in my shipping manifests. I opened the text messaging application first. The inbox was completely empty. The outbox was empty. The draft folder was empty. I moved to the call logs. No incoming calls, no outgoing calls, no missed calls. Julian had indeed been thorough. He had wiped the basic call and text history clean after our confrontation in the driveway. He was panicking, trying to erase his digital footprint in case I decided to hire an investigator, but cowards who panic always leave a trail. They are too busy running to look back and see what they dropped. I navigated back to the main menu and opened the contact list. It was almost empty, except for a single entry. The contact was saved simply as RF. There was no full name, no email address, just a local Boston phone number. I clicked on the contact and opened the message history associated with it. Unlike the main messaging app, this was a secondary secure messaging client that Julian had installed. He had cleared the logs here too, but he had made a critical amateur mistake. He had forgotten to delete the archived chat folder hidden deep within the application's settings. I opened the archived folder. A single thread appeared between Julian and RF. I scrolled to the top and began to read the messages, dated from just 3 weeks ago. RF. The deed of trust has been successfully notarized. I stamped it yesterday afternoon. The signature matches the corporate filings perfectly. You need to wire the final fee to my personal offshore account today. Julian's reply was sent 10 minutes later. Are you absolutely sure the signature is clean? Clifton's signature has a very specific loop on the letters. If the bank's legal team audits the file, they will flag it. RF. Don't worry, I have been notarizing commercial transactions in Boston for 15 years. I used his original corporate seal format. The county recorder's office approved the filing without a single question. The loan is cleared for disbursement. Just make sure the fee is transferred. Julian. Sent. $10. 00 should be in your account now. Make sure you delete this thread and burn the physical draft. RF. Done. Pleasure doing business with you, Julian. I stared at the messages. RF. The pieces were starting to form a clear legal picture. I knew the notary registry in Boston. There was a prominent commercial notary named Roger Finch who worked out of a small office near the financial district. He had handled several minor filings for our subcontractors in the past. He had the licensing, he had the corporate files, and he had the stamp. And for $10,000, he had sold his professional license to help my son forge my signature on a commercial deed of trust. This was not just family drama. This was a conspiracy to commit grand larceny and bank fraud. Under Massachusetts law, Roger Finch's involvement as a corrupt notary meant that the document was fraudulent on its face, making it legally invalid. But more importantly, it gave me a direct target. I took out my own phone and took high-resolution photos of the burner phone screen, capturing every line of the text exchange, the routing details of the offshore account, and Roger Finch's phone number. I made sure the images were sharp and readable. I navigated back to the phone's main menu. There was still one area Julian had failed to clean, the voicemail inbox. Julian had cleared his text history, but like many people of his generation, he rarely checked his voicemail, assuming that clearing the text logs was enough to wipe the device. I opened the voicemail app. The inbox showed 2 messages. The first was a generic automated setup message from the cellular carrier. But the second message was marked as unread, received just 2 days ago at 9:15 p.m. The voicemail was from Bianca. I stood in the silent office, looking at the blinking notification on the small screen. My thumb hovered over the play button. I knew that whatever was on this recording would be the final undeniable proof of their intent. I pressed my phone's voice memo recorder to record the audio, held the burner phone speaker close to the microphone, and pressed play. Bianca's voice filled the quiet office. It did not sound like the sweet, devoted daughter-in-law who had hugged me in the driveway or brought the fresh wellness smoothies to the hospital. Her tone was sharp, cold, impatient, and dripping with pure malice. Julian, her voice hissed through the cheap speaker. You need to talk to the oncologist and tell him to sign the terminal prognosis paperwork already. I don't care how many forms it takes. If the old lady doesn't die before the wedding, we won't be able to use the grieving family excuse to get your dad to transfer the commercial collateral into our joint family trust. He's already asking questions about the Concord house. We need this wrapped up now. Get it done. The recording ended with a sharp, flat beep. I stood frozen in the center of my son's office. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The words commercial collateral and terminal prognosis echoed in my ears like a death knell. The sheer cold-blooded cruelty of it knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. They were not just waiting for Martha to die to inherit my wealth. Bianca was actively manipulating the timeline of my wife's death, trying to use her passing as a psychological weapon to force me into signing over my commercial assets while I was blinded by grief. I played the voicemail one more time, making absolutely sure my own phone captured every single word, every inflection, and the date stamp. Once the recording was saved and backed up to my private cloud drive, I turned off the burner phone. I carefully slid the device back into the slit in the backing paper of the blueprint frame. I pressed the strip of black duct tape back down, smoothing out the edges so it looked entirely undisturbed. I lifted the heavy frame and hung it back on the wall, aligning it perfectly on the metal hanger. I stepped back, checking the angle to make sure it sat exactly as it had before. I took a final scan of the office. I smoothed out the carpet fibers where my shoes had pressed near the wall. I checked the desk drawers, making sure everything was in its precise place. Satisfied that I had left no trace of my presence, I slipped out of the office, walked down the quiet hallway, and let myself out the front door. The afternoon air was still warm, but I felt a freezing chill settling deep into my bones. I walked back to my car, got behind the wheel, and sat in the heavy silence of the driver's seat. Commercial collateral. I turned the ignition key, gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. To understand the gravity of my concern, you have to understand what my commercial collateral actually meant. Over 30 years ago, long before the Boston waterfront underwent its modern luxury condominium boom, I purchased a massive, rundown commercial warehouse and shipping dock district in the industrial sector of Boston Harbor. I bought the land for almost nothing. Spent a decade renovating the historic brick structures and turned them into premium leasing spaces for high-end corporate cargo tenants. Those warehouses, the historic Boston wharves, were my absolute masterpiece. They were the crowning achievement of my 40 years of hard labor. More importantly, they were the financial bedrock of my retirement. They generated a steady, untouched stream of passive income that ensured Martha would always have access to the best private medical care in the world. No matter how long her battle with cancer lasted, I had purposely placed those commercial properties into an ironclad family trust, specifically structured so that they could not be sold, leveraged, or mortgaged without my direct, in-person's, notarized authorization. I had designed it to be completely impenetrable, but Bianca's voicemail proved they had found a way in. They had bypassed my security and they were already moving to seize the wharves. I did not drive back to the hospital. I navigated my car out of Brookline and headed toward the towering glass and steel skyscrapers of downtown Boston's financial district. I needed to see Reginald Thorpe. Reggie was my corporate attorney, a sharp, brilliant legal mind who had protected my business interests for over 3 decades. He was not a man who dealt in family drama or emotional appeals. He dealt in facts, covenants, contracts, and cold, legal warfare. The drive took about 40 minutes through heavy Boston traffic, but my mind was racing through 1,000 different scenarios. I pulled into the underground parking garage of his firm, bypassed the main reception desk entirely, and walked straight into his corner office on the 42nd floor. Reggie looked up from a stack of legal briefs, his sharp eyes instantly registering the grim expression on my face. He put his pen down and stood up, closing his heavy oak door to shut out the noise of the outer office. "Clifton," Reggie said, his voice serious. "What's happened? Is it Martha?" "Martha is secure for now," I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite his desk. "But I need you to pull the county land and property records for the Boston wharves immediately. I need a full title search and a filing audit." "Right now, Reggie." Reggie did not ask questions. He knew me too well to suggest waiting. He turned to his dual computer monitors, logged into the secure Massachusetts Land Court Registry, and began typing furiously. The silence in the office was deafening, broken only by the rapid clicking of his keyboard. I sat perfectly still, watching his face. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Reggie was a man who had defended multi-million-dollar maritime lawsuits with a completely blank expression. But as he opened a specific digital filing on his screen, his jaw tightened. He leaned closer to the monitor, reading the document line by line, his eyes widening slightly. He let out a long, slow breath, took off his reading glasses, and looked across the desk at me. "Clifton," Reggie said, his voice grave. "Have you visited a commercial lending bank in the last 30 days to authorize a major refinance on the waterfront properties?" "I haven't signed a commercial contract in over 2 years, Reggie," I replied, my voice dropping to a whisper. "What did you find?" Reggie rotated his large flat-screen monitor so it directly faced me. He pointed to a scanned legal deed displayed brightly on the screen. It was a commercial deed of trust, heavily stamped and notarized, filed with the county recorder just 3 weeks ago. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. My heart hammered against my ribs as the horrifying reality of the document became clear. Someone had used my entire Boston waterfront warehouse district as collateral to secure a massive high-interest cash loan. The total amount borrowed against my life's work was $20,500,000. I stared at the bottom of the final page. There, sitting clearly above the printed line of my legal name, was my signature. It was a masterful forgery, mimicking the exact loops and angles of my handwriting. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never held a pen to that paper. I leaned in closer to the monitor, staring at the name Roger Finch stamped in red ink. The official notary seal sat right beside the forgery of my signature. It looked pristine, authoritative, and completely legitimate to anyone who did not know the details of my life. "Finch notarized it," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "I found his contact on Julian's burner phone. Julian paid him $10,000 to stamp this document. The texts are saved on my phone." Reggie clicked his mouse, navigating to the next page of the county records. "Look at the disbursement details, Clifton. The $20,500,000 was not paid out to Julian. It wasn't deposited into any family trust or personal account. The entire sum was wired directly to a shell company registered in Delaware just 4 weeks ago. The company is called Vance Crest LLC. He pulled up the state business registry for Vance Crest LLC, highlighting the corporate filing page. And there is the sole managing director, Bianca Vance. I sat back in the leather chair, letting the data settle in my mind. Bianca had used Julian's insider knowledge of my affairs to pull this off. Julian knew the security code to the study in our Beacon Hill home. He knew where I kept the original property deeds, the corporate tax identification records, and the trust structure documents. He had simply copied my private papers, handed them to Bianca, and she had used a corrupt notary to bypass the bank's security protocols. They had walked out with $20,500,000 of pure cash, using my life's work as their personal piggy bank. "This is massive, Clifton," Reggie said, his expression intensely serious. He picked up his desk phone. "I am calling my direct contact at the Boston office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Forging a commercial deed of trust, bank fraud, and elder financial exploitation are severe federal offenses. I can have a federal prosecutor freeze the accounts of Vance Crest LLC within 2 hours. We can stop them from moving the money offshore, and we can have Julian and Bianca in custody before the day is over." "Put the phone down, Reggie," I commanded. My voice was calm, but it had a weight that made him freeze. Reggie paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. He looked at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Clifton, they have $2.5 million of your cash. If they wire that money to an offshore account in the Caymans or Switzerland, it's gone forever. The bank will hold you responsible for the loan default, and you will have to spend years in land court proving the forgery just to get your warehouses back." "Why are you hesitating?" "Because I know my son, and I know the woman who is pulling his strings," I said. "If the FBI knocks on their door today, what happens? Bianca is a licensed broker. She knows the legal system. She will instantly claim she was a victim. She will hire a high-priced criminal defense team using my own stolen money. She will claim a rogue mortgage broker handled all the paperwork and that she had no idea the signature was forged. Julian will back her up. He will claim we had a verbal agreement, that I authorized the loan to help them launch their real estate business, and that I am only backing out now because I don't approve of their marriage. I leaned across the desk, looking my old friend in the eye. They will tie this up in federal court for the next 3 years. They will delay, they will file motions, and they will drag Martha into the mud. They will demand medical depositions, forcing my dying wife to sit in front of defense lawyers while she is undergoing chemotherapy. They will claim we are vindictive. They might even get a plea deal, walk away with probation, and keep a portion of the funds hidden away. I do not want a trial, Reggie. I do not want a slow, merciful grind through the federal justice system. I want absolute, immediate, and legal destruction. Reggie slowly lowered the phone, placing it back on its cradle. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms and studying my face. He had represented me for 30 years. He had watched me build my docks, negotiate with hostile shipping cartels, and buy out my competitors. He knew that when I adopted this specific quiet tone, I had already decided to burn the bridge. "All right," Reggie said, a hint of professional curiosity in his voice. "If we aren't calling the feds, what is the play?" "I want to buy the loan," I said simply. Reggie blinked, then sat up straight. "You want to buy the promissory note?" "Clifton, that loan is held by a commercial bank. They originated the paper, and they are expecting monthly debt service payments. Commercial banks don't want to hold the risk of a high-interest commercial note," I replied, drawing on my decades of corporate financing experience. "They originate the loans, collect the lucrative processing fees, and sell the debt on the secondary market to clear their balance sheets. How much liquid capital do I have in my secondary accounts outside of the primary family trust?" Reggie turned to his computer and typed in a security code, pulling up my private investment ledgers. "You have a substantial amount in cash reserves and treasury bonds, Clifton. More than enough to cover the principal of the loan. But if you buy the debt, you are essentially paying for your own stolen money." "No," I corrected him. "I am purchasing the legal rights of the creditor. I am setting up a blind offshore trust, an anonymous entity completely shielded by legal privacy walls. Through that trust, we will approach the bank tomorrow morning. We will offer to buy the promissory note and the deed of trust for the full $20,500,000, plus a premium to ensure they close the deal immediately without asking questions. Once that deal is signed, the bank is out of the picture. The anonymous trust becomes the sole owner of the debt, and I am the sole owner of the trust." Reggie's eyes slowly widened as the legal implications of my plan began to take shape in his mind. A slow, dark smile crept across his face. "You want to become their creditor," he whispered. "Exactly," I said. "I want to own their throat. And the second the paperwork is signed, we pull the trigger." Reggie stood up, walked over to his heavy wooden credenza, and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He handed one to me, though I did not drink. I set the crystal glass on the edge of his desk, my mind focused entirely on the legal logistics. "To understand the absolute power of what you are proposing, Clifton," Reggie said, taking a slow sip, "you have to understand how commercial lending law operates in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Unlike residential mortgages, which are heavily regulated under Consumer Protection Acts, commercial lending is a different world. The law assumes that both the lender and the borrower are sophisticated business entities operating at arm's length. There are no hand-holding rules here. There is no mandatory 90-day grace period to cure a default, and there is no slow foreclosure process." He leaned over his desk, pulling up the standard boilerplate security agreement used by the specific commercial bank that Julian and Bianca had defrauded. "Look at Section 9 of the covenants," Reggie said, pointing to the dense block of text on his screen. "It's the standard material misrepresentation and fraud clause. Under this covenant, if the lender discovers that any document, signature, financial statement, or notary stamp used during the loan origination was forged, altered, or fraudulently obtained, the loan is immediately classified as in default. It is an incurable default." "And the remedy?" I asked. "The remedy is the acceleration clause," Reggie explained, his eyes shining with a sharp, professional intensity. "The owner of the note has the unilateral right to accelerate the entire debt. You do not have to wait for them to miss a monthly payment. You do not have to send polite warning letters. The moment you declare the default based on the forged signature, the entire principal balance, all $2,500,000, plus accumulated interest, legal fees, and penalties, becomes due and payable in full. The borrower has exactly 24 hours to produce the cash, and when they can't produce the cash, then the steel trap snaps shut, Reggie said, tapping his finger on the desk. As the creditor, you have the absolute legal right to instantly freeze the assets of the borrowing entity, which in this case is Vance Crest LLC. You can seize the bank accounts where the loan funds are currently sitting. You can file an immediate petition in land court to invalidate the mortgage lien, restoring your unencumbered ownership of the Boston wharves. And because the shell company used the stolen cash to purchase other assets, like that G-Wagon in the driveway, you can attach those assets as well. They will lose every single cent, every piece of property, and every luxury item they bought. And to top it off, you have the original forged documents and the text messages with the corrupt notary, which you can hand directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office for immediate criminal indictment. The beautiful, poetic irony of the situation settled deep into my chest. Julian and Bianca believed they had committed the perfect crime. They thought they had stolen from a massive, faceless banking corporation that would take months, perhaps years, to notice a forged signature buried deep in their digital archives. They believed they were securely funding a lavish lifestyle, buying a luxury vehicle, and planning a high society wedding, while they fed my wife toxic green juices and waited for her to quietly pass away. They had absolutely no idea that within 48 hours, the anonymous creditor holding the absolute power to destroy their lives would be me. How long to set up the trust and buy the note, Reggie? I asked. Setting up the offshore trust is simple, Reggie replied, already typing on his secondary laptop. We will establish it in a jurisdiction with absolute corporate privacy laws, such as the Cook Islands or Nevis. We will call it Sentinel Trust Group. I will coordinate with my partner in Geneva to act as the nominal trustee. The bank won't see your name anywhere on the documentation. They will only see an institutional buyer offering to purchase their commercial risk for 100% of the principal value plus a $50,000 transaction premium. To a bank's risk management committee, that is a dream deal. They clear a risky loan off their books and make a quick profit. He looked up at me. But Clifton, this will require liquidating a massive portion of your private reserves. Once the money is paid to the bank, it belongs to them. You are trading cash for a debt note. If Julian and Bianca have already spent a significant portion of the $2.5 million, you might not recover the full amount immediately. I don't care about the premium, and I don't care about the initial cash outlay, I said, my voice cold and firm. I want the note. I want the legal rights to that debt. I want to look Bianca Vance in the eye at her own wedding and hand her the default notice. I want her to know that every luxury she flaunted was purchased with a debt she owes directly to me. I will get the paperwork started tonight, Reggie said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I will contact the bank's commercial asset manager first thing tomorrow morning. By tomorrow afternoon, Sentinel Trust Group will own the paper. You will officially be their sole creditor. Good, I said, standing up from the leather guest chair. Make sure the transition is seamless. I want no red flags, no calls to Julian, and no warnings to Roger Finch. Keep the water perfectly still until the hook is set. I walked out of the skyscraper and stepped into the cool Boston evening, the city lights reflecting off the dark waters of the harbor. I looked out toward the wharves I had spent my life building, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The traders had tried to rob a bank, but they had unwittingly sold their souls to the very man they were trying to ruin. And I fully intended to let them celebrate their supposed victory, letting them climb to the absolute height of their arrogance before I triggered that acceleration clause and watched their entire world burn to ash. The following morning, Reggie Thorpe executed the financial maneuver with clinical efficiency. By 11 a.m., the anonymous Cook Islands entity, Sentinel Trust Group, had been officially registered, complete with nominee directors and a secure Swiss bank routing structure. By 2 p.m., Reggie was in a private conference call with the regional commercial asset manager of the bank holding the fraudulent $20,500,000 note. The bank's executive was thrilled. He was looking at a high-risk commercial mortgage on a waterfront property that had only been on their books for 3 weeks. Sentinel Trust Group offered to purchase the promissory note and the deed of trust for 100% of the principal value, plus a $50,000 transaction premium, with an immediate cash wire transfer. To the bank's underwriting committee, it was an easy win. They liquidated their risk, collected the processing fees, made a quick profit on the premium, and cleared the ledger. The paperwork was drafted, signed, and executed under strict non-disclosure covenants within 4 hours. By 6 p.m., the wire cleared. Sentinel Trust Group officially owned the debt, and I officially held the legal keys to my son's financial execution. With the legal weapon in my hands, I knew I had to make my next move on the psychological chessboard. I needed to ensure that Julian and Bianca felt completely safe and victorious. The most dangerous enemy is the one who convinces you he has already surrendered. If they suspected even for a second that I was auditing their activities, they would move the remaining cash out of Vance Crest LLC and vanish. I took a deep breath, sat in my quiet study in Beacon Hill, and dialed Julian's number. Julian answered quickly, his voice guarded and tense. He was clearly expecting another angry confrontation, another demand for the return of the $150,000, or a threat of legal action. Instead of anger, I injected my voice with deep, trembling exhaustion. I played the role of the broken, grieving husband who had no fight left. "Julian," I said, letting a weary sigh slip through the receiver. "It's Dad." "Hey, Dad," Julian said, his posture immediately shifting. "How is Mom doing? Are you okay?" "Not really, Julian," I said, keeping my voice soft and slightly cracking. "The doctors moved her to a sterile isolation wing yesterday. Her lab results are getting worse by the day. I'm so tired, son. I spent the last 24 hours sitting in that hospital room, watching her sleep, and I realized how foolish I've been." Julian hesitated. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I mean our argument in the driveway," I said, forcing a tone of deep regret. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did about the $150,000. The stress of your mother's cancer is making me lose my mind. I'm paranoid, and I'm taking it out on you. You're a grown man, a smart businessman. If you and Bianca saw an investment opportunity that would launch her career and eventually help pay for your mother's treatment in Switzerland, I should have supported you. I shouldn't have doubted my own son." I heard a sudden, audible rush of air as Julian breathed a massive sigh of relief. The tension in his voice dissolved instantly, replaced by the smooth, patronizing tone of a businessman who believed he had just successfully managed a difficult client. "Thanks, Dad," Julian said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "It means the world to me to hear you say that. I promise you, it's just a 30-day leverage. Bianca is already working on 2 massive waterfront listings. We are going to return the entire $150,000 plus the 10% interest next month, and we will get Mom the best Concord home money can buy. We just need to get past the wedding first." "I know, sons," I said, "and that's why I'm calling. I want to make things right. Your mother is too weak to travel, but she insists that we focus on family unity. I want to invite you and Bianca over to the house in Beacon Hill for dinner tomorrow night. Just a quiet, private family meal. I want to apologize to Bianca in person, and I want to hear all about her new career at Prime Boston Estates. Let's put the anger behind us." "That sounds great, Dad," Julian said, his voice filled with a genuine, predatory smile of victory. "Bianca will be so happy. She's been so stressed about the wedding and about Mom. We'll be there." "What time?" "Come at 6:30, I said. I'll roast a chicken, just the 3 of us. We'll be there, Dad. Love you." "Love you too, son," I said, and hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet study, looking at the dark wood paneling of the room. The trap was set. Julian had immediately called Bianca, and I could already picture her reaction. She would be ecstatic. She would believe that the old man was broken, that his resistance had crumbled under the weight of his wife's illness, and that the path to transferring my commercial waterfront wharves into their joint trust was wide open. They believed they had successfully conned an old fool. They believed their timeline was moving forward flawlessly. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the streetlights of Beacon Hill. Tomorrow night, I would welcome them into my home. I would serve them food, I would smile, and I would play the part of the grieving, grateful father to perfection. I would let them bask in their arrogance, letting them believe they had won the war, while I quietly prepared the legal documents that would strip them of everything they owned. I spent the afternoon preparing a simple roasted chicken dinner in the kitchen of our Beacon Hill home. The house was quiet, filled with the shadows of the past and the rich smells of rosemary and garlic. I set the dining table for three, placing the polished silver and the linen napkins exactly where they belonged. When the doorbell rang at 6:30 p.m., I took a slow, deep breath, let my shoulders drop, and adopted the posture of a tired, overwhelmed old man who was just relieved to have his family near. I opened the door. Julian and Bianca were standing on the porch. Bianca wore an elegant white sundress, holding a small bouquet of lilies in one hand and a familiar designer stainless steel flask in the other. Her signature empty smile was plastered across her face. "Clifton," she murmured in a soft, trembling voice, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around my neck. "Oh, Clifton, my heart has been aching for you and Martha." We came as soon as Julian told me. Her expensive floral perfume was nauseating, but I forced myself to return the hug with the clumsy, desperate affection of a lonely elder. "Thank you for coming, Bianca. Please, come inside." We moved into the dining room. I served the roasted chicken, keeping my hands slightly unsteady as I poured the water. Throughout the meal, I kept the focus entirely on my wife's condition. I described Martha's sudden weakness, her inability to keep food down, and the strict isolation protocols the specialists had established on the 8th floor. I watched Bianca closely as I spoke. Her face was a masterpiece of manufactured sympathy. She nodded, wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "It's just devastating, Clifton," she said, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "But you have to stay strong. Julian and I are doing everything we can. That's why I'm grinding myself to the bone at Prime Boston Estates. I landed a new listing in Back Bay today, a beautiful historical brownstone worth $15 million. The commission on that single sale will launch us. And I swear to you, the absolute second my commission check clears next month, I want to use the funds to fly Martha to that private clinic in Switzerland. I love her like my own mother." "I know, dear," I said, forcing a weary, grateful smile. "Julian told me. I can't tell you how much that means to me. I apologize for my behavior in the driveway the other day. I saw the bank statement and I panicked. I'm just so stressed about the medical bills and the Concord house falling through. I should have trusted you, Julian. You're a smart businessman, and you're investing in your family's future." Julian smiled a genuine, predatory smile of victory. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully conned his own father. "Don't worry about it, Dad," Julian said, waving his hand dismissively. "We understand, it's a stressful time, but we have everything under control. Bianca is going to dominate the luxury market here. The G-Wagon is already drawing the right clients. It's all about the optics. We just needed to leverage that $150,000 for 30 days to secure our position. I'll return the entire principal next month, plus the 10% interest. You'll get your $15,000 premium, and then we will find a much better ranch house for Mom." "I appreciate it, Julian," I said. "I really do. I don't know what I would do without you handling these real estate matters for us." As the dinner ended, Bianca stood up and reached into her canvas tote bag. Pulling out the silver flask, she set it gently on the dining table. "I woke up at 5 this morning to blend this for Martha," she said, her voice sweet and earnest. "It's a fresh organic green smoothie made with concentrated spinach, wheatgrass, and active botanical enzymes to boost her cellular recovery. I know the doctors have strict rules, but please, try to sneak a few sips to her when the nurses aren't looking. The hospital food is dead energy. She needs this live nutrition." "I will, Bianca," I said, looking at the flask. "I'll take it to her first thing tomorrow morning." I walked them to the door. I stood on the porch, waving as they climbed into the brand new, polished black G-Wagon parked under the street lamp. Bianca raised her phone to take a selfie of them in the car, laughing and pointing at the dashboard. Julian shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, the engine roaring in the quiet neighborhood. I closed the front door and locked it. The silence of the house returned, heavy and cold. I walked back into the dining room, picked up the silver flask, and carried it into the kitchen. I unscrewed the lid, poured the dark, bitter green juice directly down the sink, and rinsed the metal flask with boiling water until it was spotless. The absolute lack of human empathy in my son and his future wife was chilling. Bianca had sat at my dining table, looked me in the eye, and lied about sending my wife to Switzerland, all while handing me the very poison she was using to murder her. And Julian had sat beside her, nodding and celebrating his supposed victory over his aging father. They believed they had won. They believed I was a broken old man, waiting for my wife to die, completely blind to their theft. I walked into my study, sat behind my desk, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the secure digital folder containing the signed transfer documents for the $20,500,000 commercial loan. Sentinel Trust Group was now the registered creditor. I dialed Reggie Thorpe's private number. He answered on the first ring. "We are secure, Reggie," I said, my voice dropping the weary act, returning to the cold, hard tone of the logistics executive. "They suspect nothing. Prepare the formal default notices and the asset attachment filings. I want the paperwork ready to be served at the wedding reception." "Not a second before." "Understood, Clifton," Reggie replied. "We are locked and loaded." I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the dark Boston skyline. They wanted a grand, high-society wedding. They wanted the optics of wealth and success, and I was going to give them the stage they wanted, letting them climb to the absolute peak of their arrogance before I cut the rope and let them drop. In the 2 weeks that followed the dinner at my house, Julian and Bianca threw themselves into their wedding preparations with a frantic, ostentatious energy. On social media, Bianca curated every single detail of what she called the social event of the season. She shared photos of her custom designer gown fittings in New York, the hand-delivered calligraphy invitations, and the lavish floral arrangements she had booked. They had reserved the grand ballroom at the prestigious Boston Harbor Hotel, overlooking the waterfront, and had invited over 300 guests, a crowd composed of Boston's elite real estate brokers, property developers, high society investors, and wealthy local socialites. They were spending money like water, burning through the cash sitting in the accounts of Vance Crest LLC. They bought custom designer wardrobes, booked a luxury penthouse suite at the hotel for the wedding weekend, and even paid a massive deposit for a 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. They believed they had secured a lifetime of luxury. They believed the $20,500,000 cash they had extracted from my commercial wharves was theirs to keep, and that I would quietly sign over the properties to their joint trust once Martha passed away. But while they were building their castle of cards, I was focused on the only thing that truly mattered: saving my wife's life. Thanks to the secure environment on the 8th floor and the strict intravenous chemotherapy protocol Dr. Bennett had established, Martha's health was undergoing a miraculous transformation. Without the daily dose of St. John's wort neutralizing her medications, her body was finally able to fight the lymphoma. The life-saving drugs remained in her system, targeting the cancer cells with full efficacy. Her blood cell counts began to stabilize, her extreme nausea receded, and the healthy flush of color returned to her cheeks. She was sitting up in bed, eating solid food, and even walking short distances around the secure wing. Alan was amazed by her recovery speed. "The IV protocol is working perfectly, Clifton," he told me during a private consultation. "Her liver enzymes have returned to normal, and the cancer markers are dropping. The chemotherapy is finally doing its job. But we have to keep this completely quiet. If Julian or Bianca check the hospital records, they will see she is recovering." "They won't check," I replied. "Julian only calls me once every 3 days for a quick update, and Bianca has been too busy posting photos of her G-Wagon to visit the hospital. When they ask, I tell them she is stable but heavily sedated, too weak to speak or see visitors. They believe she is on her deathbed." While Martha healed, Reggie Thorpe and I finalized the legal framework for the trap. We gathered the evidence into a series of ironclad files. The first file contained the certified laboratory pathology reports proving the chemical composition of the green smoothies and the St. John's wort dosage, along with Nurse Clara's log of the flasks Bianca had delivered. The second file contained the forensic handwriting analysis, proving the signature on the commercial deed of trust was a forgery, combined with the copies of the texts from the burner phone, exposing the $10 zeros and payoff to the corrupt notary Roger Finch. The third file contained the recorded voicemail from Bianca, explicitly detailing their conspiracy to manipulate Martha's death to seize the commercial wharves. Using these documents, Reggie drafted the formal notice of material default and the demand for immediate acceleration of debt under Section 9 of the Security Agreement. The notice declared that due to fraudulent origination and forgery, the entire $2,500 zeros and loan was in immediate, incurable default and demanded the full repayment of the principal, interest, and penalties within 24 hours. If the borrowers defaulted, which they inevitably would, as they had already spent a large portion of the cash, Sentinel Trust Group would instantly freeze the assets of Vance Crest LLC, seize the G-Wagon, attach their Brookline home, and file the land court petition to void the mortgage, restoring my wharves to their original, unencumbered state. Reggie also compiled the criminal referral package. This file would be sent directly to the United States Attorney's Office and the FBI the exact moment the civil default was declared. It contained the complete evidence of bank fraud, commercial forgery, elder exploitation, and conspiracy to commit murder. "Everything is locked and loaded, Clifton," Reggie said, sliding the heavy leather folders across his desk. "I have arranged for a licensed, certified federal process server and 2 private security investigators to be present at the Boston Harbor Hotel during the reception. The moment you give the signal, they will serve the default papers and the asset attachment notices to Julian and Bianca in front of their guests. The criminal files will be delivered to the federal prosecutors at the same time." "Perfect," I said, looking at the documents. They wanted a grand stage. They wanted to show off their stolen wealth to the entire city. It is only fitting that they receive their ruin on the exact same stage. I walked back to my car, the cold autumn wind blowing off the Boston Harbor. The wedding was now just 4 days away. I felt no hesitation, no doubt, and no sorrow. Julian had made his choice when he chose cowardly submission to a monster, standing by while she poisoned his own mother. Bianca had made her choice when she decided to murder a sick woman for her legacy. They had sown the wind, and now they were about to reap the absolute fury of the whirlwind. 2 days before the wedding, Julian and Bianca checked into their luxury waterfront suite at the Boston Harbor Hotel. The room was a massive multi-room space, with panoramic views of the harbor and the very wharves that I had built. They had stocked the suite with expensive champagne, designer garment bags, and gift boxes from luxury retailers. From my private security investigators' reports, I knew they spent the evening celebrating. Bianca was pouring champagne, laughing, and trying on her diamond jewelry in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. She was completely wrapped in her own arrogance. "Your dad is completely managed, Julian," Bianca said, looking at her reflection. "He looked so pathetic at dinner. He was actually apologizing to me. Once the old lady passes away next month, we will use the grieving family excuse to have him transfer the Boston Wharves commercial portfolio into our joint trust. He doesn't have the strength or the will to run those properties alone anymore. We'll be in complete control of the waterfront before the year is out." Julian leaned back on the plush sofa, holding his glass of champagne. "I told you, Bianca, my dad is old school. He's tired and he's blind when it comes to me. He's just relieved that we are getting married and that I'm taking care of things. He's practically giving us the keys." They laughed, clinking their glasses together, toast after toast, celebrating a future built on forgery, theft, and attempted murder. They had no idea that the silent wharves they were staring at through the glass were already owned by Sentinel Trust Group, and that I was simply waiting for their wedding day to cut the strings of their puppet show. While they were celebrating their stolen future, I was sitting in the quiet warmth of Martha's room on the 8th floor of Massachusetts General Hospital. The change in Martha over the last 14 days was nothing short of a miracle. The new intravenous chemotherapy protocol had stabilized her. The dark, heavy circles under her eyes had faded, replaced by a healthy, warm color. Her breathing was steady, her appetite had returned, and she was able to stand and walk around the room without any assistance. I sat beside her, holding her hand. I had initially planned to keep her in the hospital during the wedding, shielding her from the upcoming legal storm. I wanted to face Julian and Bianca alone, handle the default filings, and let the federal agents arrest them without Martha having to witness the ruin of our son. But Martha looked at me, her eyes filled with a quiet, fierce determination that I had not seen since her diagnosis. "Clifton," she said, her voice soft but incredibly firm, "I know what you are doing. I know you are preparing for a confrontation, and I want to go to the wedding." I frowned, squeezing her hand. "Martha, sweetheart, you're still recovering. The hospital wing is secure, and Dr. Bennett wants you to rest. The stress of that crowd, the noise, it's too much for you right now." "No," Martha said, shaking her head. "They tried to destroy me, Clifton. Bianca sat in our home and fed me those smoothies, pretending to care for me while she was neutralizing my medications. She wanted me dead. She wanted to steal the business we spent 4 decades building, and Julian, our own son, sat by and allowed it to happen." She leaned forward, her grip on my hand tightening. "I will not hide in this hospital room like a victim while you go to war for us. I want to stand beside you, Clifton. I want to look Bianca in the eye in front of all her high society friends. I want them to see that they did not kill me. I want to see the look on her face when the truth is revealed." I stared at my wife. For months, I had seen her get smaller, weaker, and more fragile under the weight of her illness and the secret poisoning. But in this moment, the strong, elegant woman who had stood beside me when we had nothing but a leased crane on a wooden pier was back. Her spirit was completely unbroken. "Are you sure, Martha?" I asked. "It will be difficult." "I am entirely sure," she said. I called Dr. Alan Bennett into the room. We discussed the logistics. Because her blood counts were stable and her heart was strong, Alan agreed to clear her for a 3-hour discharge, provided she traveled in a private medical transport, used a lightweight wheelchair for mobility, and was accompanied by Nurse Clara at all times. I spent the next 2 days preparing the final details. I bought Martha a beautiful, elegant silk gown in a deep emerald green, along with a soft silk scarf and a custom, high-quality wig to cover her head. I also met with Reggie Thorpe one last time. The default papers, the asset attachment filings, and the federal indictment referrals were all printed, signed, and placed into a heavy cream-colored wedding envelope. The process servers and the security team were briefed. They knew their entry points at the Boston Harbor Hotel. The stage was set. The traders believed they were walking into the happiest day of their lives, a celebration of their wealth and social standing. They had no idea that they were walking directly into the ruins of their own design, and that Martha and I would be there to watch the walls fall. The morning of the wedding was crisp, clear, and cold. The wind swept off the Atlantic, carrying the sharp, salty scent of the harbor. At 10:30 a.m., the private medical transport arrived at our Beacon Hill home. I helped Martha get ready in our bedroom, the same room we had shared for 30 years. I assisted her as she slipped into the deep emerald green silk gown. The fabric draped beautifully over her frame, which was still thin but no longer looked frail. I helped her adjust the custom wig I had purchased. It was a soft, elegant style of silver and chestnut curls that framed her face perfectly, covering the bruised and bare scalp left by the chemotherapy. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes were bright, and a genuine, dignified smile touched her lips. She looked like the matriarch of the Barlow family, proud, elegant, and entirely unbroken. I wore my finest dark charcoal wool suit. As I adjusted my tie, I reached for the heavy, cream-colored wedding envelope resting on my dresser. I slid it into my breast pocket, right next to my heart. The envelope did not contain a check or a property deed. It contained the legal default notices, the asset attachment orders, and the copies of the criminal evidence that would dismantle my son's life. Nurse Clara checked Martha's vitals one last time, ensuring she had her emergency medications and water. Satisfied that everything was stable, we climbed into the transport and drove toward the Boston Harbor Hotel. When we arrived, the scale of their ostentation was staggering. The hotel's courtyard was filled with luxury sedans and sports cars. Valet drivers were rushing back and forth. Valet plates from Brookline, Back Bay, and Beacon Hill were everywhere. The guests, over 300 of Boston's wealthiest developers, brokers, and socialites, were dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns, sipping champagne as they walked through the lobby. The ceremony was held on the outdoor terrace overlooking the harbor, under a massive arch made of imported white roses. A live string quartet played classical music. Every single detail, from the crystal chairs to the gold-embossed programs, had been funded by the $20,500,000 cash they had stolen from my wharves. It was a monument to unearned luxury, built on the back of a forged mortgage and the attempted murder of the woman sitting beside me. I pushed Martha's lightweight wheelchair to our seats in the front row. As the guests began to sit, I saw Julian standing at the altar. He looked polished in his custom tuxedo, but when his eyes locked onto us, his posture stiffened. His jaw dropped slightly, and a flash of pure panic crossed his face before he quickly forced a smile. He had expected Martha to be sedated in a hospital room, not sitting in the front row, looking elegant and healthy. Then the music changed, and Bianca began her walk down the aisle. She looked stunning in a custom lace gown with a long silk train. Her bridesmaids followed her, wearing matching designer dresses. Bianca walked with the slow, practiced grace of a model, her eyes scanning the crowd, basking in the cameras and the whispers of admiration. But as she neared the altar and saw Martha sitting next to me, her empty smile froze. For a split second, her eyes widened in shock. Her foot caught on the hem of her dress, causing her to stumble slightly before she recovered her balance. She had not expected this. Her timeline had failed. Martha was not only alive, she was sitting there, watching her. The ceremony began. The minister spoke of love, honor, and lifelong loyalty. I sat in the front row, holding Martha's warm hand in mine, watching the two traitors exchange their vows. Julian looked at Bianca with a soft, submissive adoration. Bianca looked at Julian with the calculating gaze of a predator who had finally secured her prize. "I promise to love you, to cherish you, in sickness and in health," Julian recited, his voice echoing through the sound system. The irony was sickening, but my face remained perfectly calm. I did not make a sound. I did not show a hint of the storm that was brewing in my pocket. I watched them place the rings on each other's fingers, sealing their contract of greed. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. The crowd erupted into applause. Julian kissed his bride, and Bianca turned to the guests, raising her bouquet in a gesture of absolute triumph. They walked back down the aisle, showered in white rose petals, completely oblivious to the fact that their marriage was already a legal and financial dead end. The guests began to move toward the grand ballroom for the reception. I slowly stood up, gripping the handles of Martha's wheelchair. "Are you ready, Martha?" I whispered, leaning down. Martha looked up at me, her eyes cold and steady. "Let's finish this, Clifton." I turned the wheelchair and began pushing her toward the ballroom, navigating a path through the wealthy crowd. The stage was set, the guests were gathered, and the actors were in place. It was time to raise the curtain on their ruin. The grand ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel was a spectacle of absolute decadence. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor's dark blue waters where luxury yachts were docked. Inside, the space was illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers. Towers of fresh local oysters, lobster tails, and imported cheeses stood on ice sculptures. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of expensive vintage champagne. Julian and Bianca were basking in their triumph. They stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a large crowd of local developers, elite real estate brokers, and high society socialites. Bianca was laughing, her voice carrying over the music, gesturing widely as she showed off her custom lace gown and the diamond earrings she had purchased with my stolen cash. She was the queen of the room, and she knew it. Martha and I sat at a round table near the front of the stage. Nurse Clara stood quietly a few paces behind us, monitoring Martha's posture and breathing. Martha sat tall, her face serene, her hands resting calmly on the white tablecloth. She did not look like a dying cancer patient. She looked like a woman of immense dignity, quietly observing the parasites who had tried to feed on her life. I could see Bianca glancing toward our table every few minutes. Her eyes were not focused on Martha's health or the miracle of her recovery. They were locked onto the breast pocket of my charcoal suit jacket, where the heavy cream-colored wedding envelope was clearly visible. She had been begging Julian for days to secure the family gift, fully expecting that my submission at dinner meant I was handing over the deeds to the Boston Wharves, or a multi-million-dollar cash check to launch her new career. After their first dance under the spotlights, Julian and Bianca walked hand in hand toward our table. Bianca's bridesmaids followed close behind, laughing and whispering. Bianca's smile was sweet and sugary as she approached, but her eyes were cold, sharp, and hungry. "Clifton, Martha!" Bianca gushed, leaning down and pressing her cheek against mine in a fake embrace. "Oh, I am so incredibly happy you made it. Martha, you look wonderful. It is a true miracle that you had the strength to leave the hospital today. We are just so blessed to have you here." She did not wait for Martha to reply. Her eyes slid instantly to my breast pocket. She gave a soft, high-pitched giggle, playing the excited, innocent bride. "Julian told me you brought a special family envelope for us," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I saw it in your pocket, Clifton. We are just so touched that you wanted to give us something personal on our special day. Is that our wedding gift?" Julian stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, his posture smug and expectant. "Yeah, Dad. Bianca's been talking about it all day. She's been so excited to see what the family legacy is going to look like for us." I looked at my son and then at the woman standing beside him. The sheer, naked greed radiating from them was suffocating. They had poisoned my wife, forged my name, and stolen $20,500,000. And yet here they were, demanding more, completely confident that they had successfully conned an old man. "Yes, Bianca," I said quietly, my voice perfectly calm. "It is a very special gift. It's a document that outlines the future of our family trust and the commercial wharves. I wanted to hand it to you personally today." I reached into my breast pocket, slowly pulled out the heavy cream-colored envelope, and held it out to her. Bianca's eyes flashed with absolute greed. She did not even try to play the polite bride who sets gifts aside for later. She grabbed the envelope from my hand with a sharp, swift movement, her manicured acrylic nails scratching against the thick paper. "Oh, Clifton, you shouldn't have," she cried, her voice raised so that the nearby tables could hear her. "We are just so grateful, Julian. Look, your father is so generous." A few of her real estate colleagues and bridesmaids crowded around her, smiling and waiting to see the massive check or deed she was about to display. Bianca did not hesitate. She slid her thumb under the gold wax seal, tearing the thick cream paper open with a harsh ripping sound. She pulled out the stack of documents inside, expecting to see a deed of trust transfer or a certified bank clearance form. But as she pulled the papers out, her smile slowly faltered. The top page was not a deed or a check. It was a heavy, formal legal document printed on Reginald Thorpe's firm stationery. At the top, printed in bold black letters, were the words, asterisk, notice of material debt and demand for immediate acceleration of debt. Bianca blinked, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. She adjusted the papers, pulling out the second sheet, which was a copy of the Delaware Corporate Registry for Vance Crest LLC, followed by a scanned copy of the forged county deed of trust, with Roger Finch's notary stamp highlighted in yellow marker. I watched her face closely. The smug, victorious grin on her face froze, and the color slowly drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, pasty white. What is this?" Bianca whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "Julian, what is this?" Julian snatched the documents from Bianca's trembling hands. His eyes raced across the text, scanning the routing numbers, the highlighted Delaware incorporation codes, and the forensic report. As he read the words forgery, unauthorized commercial collateral, and immediate acceleration, the glass of champagne in his hand began to shake violently. "Dad," Julian whispered, the panic in his voice cutting through the soft background music of the ballroom. This is Sentinel Trust Group. How do you have these files?" I own the trust, Julian, I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying only the cold weight of a final audit. I bought the note from the bank yesterday afternoon. I am the sole owner of your $2.5 million debt. And as of this exact moment, I am declaring a material default under Section 9 of the security agreement. Bianca's eyes were darting around the room, realizing that her high society friends, her real estate colleagues, and her wealthy clients were watching her. Her polished, professional director persona was evaporating, replaced by the raw, vicious panic of a cornered predator. "This is a joke!" Bianca suddenly shrieked, her voice rising to a sharp, ugly pitch that cut through the chatter of the ballroom. Several tables nearby went completely silent, guests turning around to stare. "Your father has lost his mind. He is senile. He's fabricating these documents because he's jealous of our success. He's trying to ruin our wedding day." She stepped closer to our table, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. She pointed a manicured finger at Martha, who sat calmly in her wheelchair. "Look at her!" Bianca screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She's practically half dead anyway. She's a cancer-ridden old woman who couldn't even walk a flight of stairs, and you're letting her drag this family down. She's sitting here wearing a fake wig to hide her disease, pretending to be a matriarch. This whole family is a circus." In a sudden, desperate, and vicious move, Bianca lunged forward. Before Nurse Clara or I could react, her hand flew out, gripped the edge of Martha's chestnut curls, and violently ripped the wig off her head. Martha's bare, bruised scalp, scarred and sensitive from months of brutal chemotherapy, was instantly exposed under the harsh, bright chandeliers of the grand ballroom. The ballroom went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Over 300 guests stood frozen, staring in absolute shock at the cruelty of the act. A few of Bianca's bridesmaids giggled nervously, and some of her real estate colleagues snickered, but the majority of the room was filled with a heavy, suffocating horror. I looked at my son. Julian stood perfectly still, his glass of champagne still shaking in his hand. He looked at his mother's bare head, then at his bride, and did absolutely nothing. He did not step in. He did not defend his mother's dignity. He chose cowardly submission, choosing to protect his stolen mansion and his luxury G-Wagon over basic human decency. He was a coward through and through. Martha sat in her wheelchair, her body trembling softly under the weight of the public humiliation. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she did not bow her head. She kept her chin up, looking Bianca dead in the eye with a quiet, profound strength. I did not scream. I did not throw a punch. I did not make a scene. I slowly stood up, keeping my movements deliberate and steady. I unbuttoned my dark wool suit jacket, slipped it off my shoulders, and stepped next to my wife. I gently draped the warm jacket over Martha's trembling shoulders, covering her head and pulling the lapels close to shield her from the staring eyes of the crowd. I knelt down beside her, kissing her forehead gently. "I've got you, sweetheart," I whispered. "It's over." I stood back up, turning my attention to Julian and Bianca. They were standing on the stage now, Bianca clutching the ripped wig in one hand and the legal documents in the other, her chest heaving as she tried to maintain her defensive stance. But the ballroom was no longer hers. The 300 guests were staring at her with a mixture of disgust and horror. The wind off the harbor was blowing through the glass doors, but the coldest thing in that room was the look in my eyes. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen to send a single text message to Reggie Thorpe, who was waiting in the lobby below. The text read, *execute, *. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung open. Reginald Thorpe walked in, his expression calm, professional, and entirely serious. Behind him walked a certified Massachusetts court process server and two private security investigators dressed in dark suits. The small group moved down the center aisle of the ballroom, their footsteps echoing in the dead silence of the room, heading straight toward the stage. The guests watched in stunned silence. The wealthy brokers, the developers, and the socialites parted like the Red Sea, desperate to avoid the path of what was clearly a major legal execution. Reggie stepped up onto the stage, stopping just a few feet from Julian and Bianca. The process server stood beside him, pulling a thick folder of official court documents from his leather briefcase. He stepped forward and handed the files directly to Julian. Bianca stood frozen, still clutching Martha's wig in her hand. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with panic. Reggie adjusted his glasses and spoke, his voice clear, projected and carrying over the sound system so that every single guest in the ballroom heard every word. Julian Barlow, Bianca Vance, Reggie announced. I am representing Sentinel Trust Group, the registered creditor holding the deed of trust on the Boston Wharves commercial estate. As of 2 p.m. yesterday, my client acquired the promissory note for the $20,500,000 loan you secured. Under Section 9 of the Security Covenants, we have filed a formal notice of material default based on proven forgery and fraudulent origination. He gestured to the process server. The documents you have just been served outline the immediate acceleration of the entire debt. The full balance of $2,500,000 is due and payable in full. Because the funds were secured through fraudulent means, Sentinel Trust Group has obtained an emergency court order. We have frozen all bank accounts associated with Vance Crest LLC. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of 300 guests. Bianca's bridesmaids whispered frantically behind their hands. Furthermore, Reggie continued, his voice cold and clinical, we have attached all secondary assets purchased with the direct proceeds of this fraud. The custom Brookline estate, the unlisted luxury property in Aspen, the designer wardrobes, the custom jewelry, and the obsidian black Mercedes-AMG G63, parked in the hotel courtyard, are now under the legal control of Sentinel Trust Group. They are officially seized. The process server stepped toward Bianca. Miss Vance, by order of the Massachusetts Land Court, you are required to immediately surrender the keys to the Mercedes-AMG G63. If you refuse, security will have the vehicle towed from the premises and you will be cited for contempt of court. Bianca stared at the process server, her fingers losing their grip. The wig she was holding slipped from her hands, dropping onto the polished floor of the stage. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, silent gasp came out. Her entire world, the luxury G-Wagon, the Aspen mansion, the designer clothes, and her high society branding, was dissolving into a pile of worthless paper. Julian looked down at the court orders in his hands. The reality of their financial ruin hit him with the force of a physical blow. He dropped to his knees on the stage, the documents scattering around him. The arrogant, MBA-educated businessman was gone, replaced by a weeping, terrified boy. He looked toward our table, his face wet with tears, wailing with a pathetic, hollow grief. "Dad," Julian cried, his voice cracking. "Dad, please, you can't do this to me. We can talk about this. I'm your son. I'm your only son. I did it for the family trust. I did it for Bianca's career. Please, Dad, don't destroy me." I stood next to Martha's wheelchair, my hands resting on the rubber handles. I looked down at the boy I had raised, the boy who had stood by and watched his mother slowly get poisoned, choosing to look away so he could park a luxury G-Wagon in his driveway. I looked at the man who had allowed his bride to humiliate his dying mother in front of 300 strangers just for a cheap laugh. "You chose your path, Julian," I said, my voice cold, flat, and carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "You chose cowardly submission to a monster over basic human decency. You stood by and watched your mother suffer, knowing she was being poisoned, and you did nothing. A man who can watch his own mother get abused for the sake of a stolen mansion is no longer a part of my family. I legally removed your name from all trust and inheritance documents yesterday morning." I looked at him with a quiet, unyielding disgust. "You are no son of mine." Before Julian could crawl back toward me, the main double doors of the grand ballroom opened once again. 4 tall, plainclothes federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical badges on their belts walked into the room. They moved with a swift, practiced authority, bypassing the guests and walking directly onto the stage. The lead agent stepped forward, pulling a set of handcuffs from his belt. He looked down at Julian, who was still weeping on his knees, and then at Bianca, who stood frozen with the court documents clutching her lace dress. "Julian Barlow, Bianca Vance," the agent announced, his voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have federal arrest warrants for both of you. You are being placed under arrest for bank fraud, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy to commit murder by chemical poisoning. The words conspiracy to commit murder sent a violent shockwave through the room. The remaining murmurs of the guests vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, absolute silence. The agents did not waste time. One agent stepped behind Julian, pulled his arms behind his back, and snapped the metal handcuffs around his wrists. Julian did not resist. He simply collapsed further, wailing with a pathetic, hollow grief that generated zero sympathy. Behind him, Bianca completely lost the final remnants of her sanity. As the second agent reached for her wrists, she let out a shriek of rage so loud it rattled off the high glass windows. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, kicking her expensive heels and twisting violently against the agent's firm grip. "This is a setup. He's lying. The old man is trying to frame us. Julian, do something. Call our lawyer. You can't do this to me. I am the director of Prime Boston Estates." She was screaming like a wild, untamed banshee, her beautiful lace wedding gown tearing at the shoulder as she struggled. Her makeup was smeared with sweat and tears, her hair disheveled, her face contorted in a mask of pure, ugly madness. The agents remained completely unfazed. They locked the metal cuffs around her wrists, gripped her arms securely, and began to physically march her down the stairs and down the long center aisle of the ballroom. Her hideous shrieks of rage and denial echoed off the high ceilings as they dragged her past the tables. Her bridesmaids backed away in horror, shielding their faces from the cameras. Julian was pulled to his feet, his head hanging low, sobbing hysterically as the other agents marched him out right behind her. The 300 elite guests did not stay to offer their support. The wealthy brokers, the developers, and the high society investors were already scrambling frantically toward the side exits, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of a federal criminal investigation. They abandoned their glasses of expensive champagne, overturned their wooden chairs in their rush to escape, and left their designer coats behind. Within 5 minutes, the grand, opulent wedding reception had disintegrated into total, irreversible ruin. I turned my back on the absolute chaos, completely dismissing my sobbing former son from my reality. I knelt down securely beside Martha's wheelchair, gently placing my warm hands over hers. She was still trembling softly beneath the heavy drape of my suit jacket, but her eyes were calm and clear. "It's over, Martha," I spoke to her in a soft, deeply comforting whisper. "The nightmare is permanently over. The monsters have been removed from our lives, and absolutely nobody will ever be allowed to hurt or humiliate you again." Martha looked at the empty stage where her son's wedding had just collapsed, and then she looked at me. A single, quiet tear rolled down her cheek, but her breathing was steady. She squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "Let's go home, Clifton," she said. I slowly stood up, gripped the rubber handles of her wheelchair, and turned her around. I did not cast a single glance back at the stage or the scattered legal papers. I began to push Martha smoothly across the imported marble floors, navigating a calm, steady path through the numerous overturned chairs, the abandoned champagne flutes, and the scattered, useless white roses that littered the floor. We walked slowly and quietly out of the ruined, empty ballroom, leaving the shattered, burning remains of Julian and Bianca's stolen life far behind us in the dark. The passage of 3 months felt less like a simple turning of calendar pages, and much more like emerging from a suffocating, lightless cavern into the brilliant warmth of a new morning. The chaotic, aggressive fallout from that disastrous wedding reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel was swift, merciless, and absolutely final. Julian and Bianca never even saw the inside of a honeymoon suite. Instead, they were immediately transported into federal custody, where they have remained securely locked in federal holding cells without the possibility of bail. The sheer scale and brazen audacity of their financial crimes, combined with the incredibly compelling evidence of their malicious tampering with my wife's medical treatments, prompted the federal judge to classify them both as extreme flight risks. The custom Brookline estate, along with the luxury property in Aspen, the designer wardrobes, the expensive jewelry, and the obsidian black Mercedes G-Wagon they had so arrogantly paraded around the city, were immediately seized and liquidated by government authorities. Their sprawling, meticulously curated empire of lies collapsed into a pile of worthless ash. I systematically and permanently cut Julian out of every single aspect of my life. I legally removed his name from all inheritance documents, severed every remaining familial tie, and ensured he would never again have the opportunity to cast his dark, toxic shadow over our peaceful existence. He chose his path of greed and cowardice, and now he must walk it entirely alone. The swift, aggressive liquidation of their fraudulently acquired assets successfully returned the stolen $20,500,000 directly back into my personal accounts. That recovered money did not go back into a dormant retirement fund. Instead, it became the exact key to unlocking a literal miracle for the woman who deserved it the most. We immediately utilized those recovered funds to enroll Martha in a highly exclusive, revolutionary immune cell therapy program at a premier oncology research center in Boston. Unburdened by the toxic, chemically laced green smoothies Bianca had been secretly feeding her, Martha's fragile body finally had a genuine fighting chance to heal. The transformation over the last 90 days has been nothing short of breathtaking. This morning, the crisp, cool autumn breeze sweeping off the vast expanse of Boston Harbor carried the sweet, unmistakable scent of genuine hope. Martha and I sat quietly side by side on a weathered wooden park bench, watching the gentle, rhythmic waves break against the rocky shoreline. The heavy folding wheelchair that had once confined her was completely gone. She sat upright, her posture radiating a quiet, profound strength that had been absent for far too long. The dark, heavy circles that used to bruise the delicate skin beneath her eyes had entirely faded, replaced by a warm, healthy flush of life. Her recent medical reports confirmed what my own eyes could already clearly see. Her aggressive cancer markers were dropping with miraculous, unprecedented speed. The revolutionary therapy was actively working, targeting and destroying the illness that had nearly stolen her away from me. I reached over and gently took her hand, marveling at the returning warmth in her fingers. I looked at her head, deeply moved by the sight of her beautiful natural hair beginning to grow back. A soft, elegant crown of silver and chestnut curls was slowly replacing the painful, bare scalp she had endured under the harsh ballroom spotlights. She turned her face toward the bright morning sun, closing her eyes and taking a deep, unhindered breath of the fresh harbor air. A serene, beautiful smile touched her lips, completely unburdened by the crushing weight of betrayal and deceit that had suffocated our home for the better part of a year. We had successfully excised the deadly, malignant cancer root from our family tree just in time. The toxic greed and the profound cruelty that Julian and Bianca brought into our lives had been completely eradicated, leaving behind a profound, unbreakable peace. We lost a son to the corrupting, relentless allure of wealth and status, but in that painful, necessary severance, we successfully reclaimed our own lives. As I sat there, holding my beloved wife's hand, watching the brilliant, golden sunlight dance across the gently rippling surface of the deep blue water, I knew with absolute, unwavering certainty that our true story was never going to end in a tragic, quiet defeat. The chilling memory of that grand ruined ballroom feels incredibly distant right now, washed away completely by the steady, deeply comforting rhythm of the crashing waves. We no longer look back at the violently shattered remnants of that dark, painful past. We only look forward to the beautiful mornings we still have left to share. Family is often portrayed as an unbreakable bond, but shared blood does not grant anyone the right to abuse, manipulate, or exploit you. True love is always rooted in mutual respect, careful compassion, and deep integrity, and never greed. When those closest to you wear masks of deceit to strip you of your dignity, setting rigid boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of pure survival. Never let the guilt of family ties force you to quietly endure toxic behavior. Protect your peace, safeguard your personal legacy, and remember that walking away is the absolute greatest victory.